What is woke? It sounds like a silly question after fighting against it for 10 years, but it is more important to ask and answer it now than ever, especially as it relates to video games and entertainment, as this video is brought on by a Reddit post about Dispatch. One that has been going around Twitter as well, with a lot of people arguing about whether or not the game is woke. With the Reddit post arguing that the game fits the, quote, right-wing definition of woke. And why? Because it has characters of different skin colors and a gay guy. Wow, that is certainly an interesting perception of the right we have there. And from what we learned recently from the alt-right playbook, almost certainly a purely fabricated one. In this regard, it has much in common with many of the reasons the commentators on the post invent for themselves too. Quote, why do they not hate it? Well, it was very popular and every right-winger is just a grifter, etc. However, the question still merits answering, as I have indeed seen some people all too hasty to declare things woke for superficial reasons. I railed against this very thing during the Kingdom Come 2 drama, where there was a lot of division on my side of the aisle on whether or not that game was woke. So it is very important then that we understand what the word woke actually means, lest it simply become our version of the left wing's Nazi, a pejorative with no actual weight or understanding of what it means. All in order so as to make sure that we do not unnecessarily cede ground to our opposition. So, let's begin answering the question, shall we? Why did the evil Chuds not reject Dispatch, and what is woke? First and foremost, the direct question part is very easy to answer. I made a post about it that went semi-viral back during Dispatch's period of peak popularity, pointing out quite simply that nobody had any problems with the, quote, diversity because the game was good. It was great, in fact, and there was absolutely zero focus on the diversity as a topic in and of itself. Flambe never turned to the camera and said, oh, and by the way, I like penis. Neither did Coop complain about being racially stereotyped, or Blazer bitch about the glass ceiling at SDN. There is one joke in there about the corporation being politically correct, and that is it. The race, sexuality, gender, etc. of the characters are all parts of them, but they are not all that they are. Which gives us a perfect jumping off point for explaining what woke truly is. Starting with a definition. If we are to be maximally charitable and precise, and we are going to endeavor to do so, then I would go with woke refers to adopting intersectionality as a primary analytical lens through which to view the world. One that examines how multiple social identities and categories such as race, gender, class, sexuality, disability, and others intersect and interact to shape an individual's unique experiences of advantage, disadvantage, or compounded marginalization, and then actively working to identify and address real societal harms, blind spots in institutions, and overlapping forms of discrimination or exclusion that single-axis approaches focusing on one category alone might overlook or fail to remedy. Or to put it more succinctly, to be woke is to view the world through an intersectional lens, and then moving to right the societal wrongs caused by the oppressive power structures as identified by that intersectional lens. That last part is of particular importance, as many of the abusive power structures, well, they only really appear when placed under aforementioned very specific lens. And yes, I do have some misgivings with this definition, which we will expand upon in a moment, but we are being charitable here. Not just for the sake of civility, mind you, the left has hardly extended any of that in our direction, so why even bother, but because a definition based on one's own view of a thing is more often than not worthless. Often, in fact, worse than worthless, as it does nothing to help you identify the thing. Take again the left wing's definition of Nazi: a bad man that does bad things and must be punched. Okay. How, in any way whatsoever, does this help us figure out what a Nazi is? This is the trap the left has already fallen into, unable to even determine what their opposition are anymore, and one that we shall endeavor to avoid. Now, I am not going to dive into a full explanation and history lesson of what intersectionality and its lens is here. It is a long and complicated topic, better suited to its own video at some point. Instead, I will give you the salient points as they relate to this topic: entertainment. So bear with me as we are going to stay academic a little while longer. Intersectionality is the critical theory of identifying multiple points of oppression and disadvantage rather than just one. What precisely does all of this mean? Well, the example given by the creator of intersectionality illustrates it quite well. You have a black woman. She has been fired from her job at a factory and sues for wrongful termination on the basis of discrimination. A court looks at the case and sees the company has other black employees. No discrimination there. The company also has other female employees. No discrimination there either. Intersectionality then comes in and says, but wait, there are no other black and female employees, so this company exclusively discriminates against African American women. Discrimination confirmed. And hey, as a theoretical scenario, it makes a certain amount of sense. There could be a fringe case where discrimination is based on multiple inherent characteristics rather than any single one. But the problem is, this in essence leads to a situation where if you don't find a reason for discrimination in one area, then we are now encouraged to simply keep looking until we find it or invent it in another area. It literally becomes a laundry list of grievances. And, significantly worse still, it encourages viewing the world in terms of compounding discrimination, leading to the progressive pyramid of oppression, where, obviously, white men are the oppressors. And so they are at the very bottom of the pyramid, and everyone above them can do damn near anything they want to them, because any action taken by the oppressed to free themselves from the oppressor is by definition justified. This is why it is perfectly acceptable to openly call for the oppression of white men, or even indeed calling for the, quote, abolition of the white race. That's a very subtle dog whistle right there. Meanwhile, conversely, refusing to transition literal children, too young to determine their own bedtime, much less so their gender, is declared as anti-LGBTQ legislation, with some particularly insane individuals declaring that this is in fact nothing short of a transgender genocide. So to reiterate, abolishing the white race is all okay and obviously good, you bigot. But telling a 6-year-old that no, you can't actually snip off your penis and start wearing a dress, that's genocide. God fucking damn, we live in insane times. Okay, calming down. We are trying to remain nice and rational here, so in sharp contrast to the definitions laid out, the effect of woke is that it creates a social hierarchy based upon the levels of oppressions suffered by a person or a group. E.g., black men are more oppressed than white men, but black women are even more oppressed than black men, etc. And as the previous examples illustrate quite well, That does indeed mean that they can do pretty much anything they want to do to anyone lower on the ladder. That is a lot of power, and obviously therefore quite desirable. And as power is always desirable, rising up the ladder becomes a point of paramount importance to everyone participating in it, leading them to view the world near exclusively in terms of these power structures. Now, the way this would translate into a video game, then, is that the more layers of oppressions that can be identified within the video game, the more woke it is. Bring it now back to our dispatch example. I look at Flambe and see a surprisingly complex character. He is clearly suffering from histrionic personality disorder. He thrives on success and being the center of attention. He needs to be the center, and if he is not, or if he fails, he gets demotivated very quickly. This is why he gets along so well with Prism. She is, after all, literally a walking spotlight. His relationship with Robert, too, is a multifaceted one as well. He lost 2 of his fingers during a fight with Mecha Man, and if Robert reveals that he is Mecha Man near the midpoint of the game, Flambe flies into a rage and tries to legit burn Robert to death. One would naturally assume that this was out of rage for his lost fingers. However, when he sees Robert in costume as Mecha Man at the bar in the beginning of the game, he merely hazes him a bit. See, Flambe is not pissed off because Robert is Mecha Man. He is pissed off because he feels betrayed by Robert, as he has legitimately been beginning to build up a relationship with him and even starting to trust him. This therefore comes as a big shock to Flambe, who is, in fact, surprisingly sensitive. And in the middle of all of this, the additional information that he is from Afghanistan and a homosexual, they are nothing more than side note details, minor and largely irrelevant fluff points, mentioned perhaps a grand total of 2 or 3 times throughout the entire game. And even then in vague ways, like when he says Robert is, quote, not his type. But if we were to view this through the intersectional lens, the focus is not on who he is, but what he is. He is a foreigner, 1 point. He is brown, 2 points. He is gay, 3 points. He is neurodivergent, 4 points. He is a criminal, or more correctly, a victim of the heteronormative patriarchal judicial system, 5 points. He might, albeit unlikely, also be a Muslim, 6 points. That is a very woke character right there, ranked nice and high on the hierarchy of progressivism. And in the Reddit post, we see this very thing echoed. Why is this a woke game? Well, look at the list of intersectional identities. Women, girl bosses, people of color, gays, etc. This is the woke worldview through the intersectional lens. Whereas we would argue that this is a very pared down list of what someone is, not who they are, as, again, Flambe is a pretty damn good character, especially for an antagonistic side character, for all the reasons I recently mentioned, but that is again who he is, whereas what he is a POC, an LGBTQ, and a victim of the heteronormative capitalist patriarchy. Again, this makes Flambe, when viewed through the intersectional lens, a very diverse and thus very woke character. And the majority of the other characters too, if viewed through this lens, can be given similar levels of intersectionality, meaning in turn that the game is woke. This may seem insane, I mean, who the hell just reduces a character like that? But it makes, again, perfect sense here. The entire intersectional worldview is in essence one of points scoring, where everyone is ranked somewhere on the progressive hierarchy. And of course, due to the power inherent in a higher ranking, it is deeply desirable to be further up on that hierarchy. Thus, in turn, the more points one has, the higher up one is, the more one must necessarily belong to the hierarchy. This, by the way, is the explanation for why the anti-racist progressives are so very quick to reach for the N-bomb when confronted by someone who should belong to them, and yet they aren't accepting their position in the pyramid. In the woke worldview, these people are traitors to the system, the worst of the worst. This may, again, sound like a completely alien worldview, and it is, and explaining the rest of why this is the case is, again, somewhat beyond the scope of this particular video. If you would like to know more, I recommend, again, my video on the alt-right playbook, especially the segment explaining what the left means when they refer to whiteness. For now, suffice to say, as absurd as this view seems to us, the left wing is equally unable to understand why the right wing likes Dispatch, with the prominent reasons given in the Reddit post simply being A, the right wing are just lying grifters, embracing any and all narratives that can see them earn money from their presumably equally disingenuous or idiotic fans, or B, the right wing are just gooners. Again, see the alt-right playbook for the reason why they think we are all either idiots or liars or ruled entirely by our junk. Now, with the left-wing view of things out of the way, let's dive into the right-wing view of things. The real reason why, of course, Dispatch was so beloved despite its diverse ingredients is because, whilst there were indeed elements in it that can be clearly identified by the intersectional lens, these things were never the focus of the game, or the characters in the game. It was always about who they were, not what they were. Or to put it in a more succinct definition of how entertainment can be defined as not woke, even if it has woke elements, well, it is simply thus that entertainment is woke when it places and prioritizes real-world politics above the characters and story of the show/game. To illustrate this definition yet again, let us return to Flambe and contrast him to everyone's least favorite Klingon, who also just so happens to be the first canonically queer Klingon, Jaden Krag from Starfleet Academy. We have already talked about Flambe quite a bit here, so it's enough to reiterate that what he was, his inherent characteristics of sexuality, nationality, skin color, etc., were barely even mentioned. They were a part of him, but they were not all of him. If anything, in fact, they were the least parts of him. Whilst in the case of Jaden, being gay is all he is, above and beyond all other concerns. For example, he is not even a Klingon. He is the precise opposite of a Klingon every way. He is soft, sensitive, and values life above all. He does not wish to be a warrior, but a medic, and he always behaves in an effete, feminine manner like he's some small animal about to be startled. And his story, too, throughout Starfleet Academy is all about his sexuality. His origins are about his family choosing, in their own way, to accept that he was different, to accept that he was the gay, giving him their blessing for his queer ways. And his story in the contemporary timeline of the show at the Academy is a three-way romance between himself and two other gay cadets, one of whom Jaden is basically bringing out of the closet. Or, to have the actor himself explain the focus of the character.
Is he a gay Klingon or is he a queer Klingon? He's gay.
He is
Capital
gay. Okay.
Gay. He is gay. Jaden is gay. Gay. Gay.
Okay, that was unclear. Is he?
And finally, of course, the capital G gay also extends to the person who plays him, as the actor Karim Dian is also a flaming homosexual. And just in case you somehow still missed the message, here is the actor also writing in a comment on his Instagram post about the show's cancellation, stating that the season 2 will be, quote, gay as fuck. I genuinely don't know if this contrast could possibly be any starker here. It is not at all arbitrary that one of these entities was judged to be woke and the other not. Because, as we lead back to my previous definition here, a woke piece of entertainment is one that places and prioritizes real-world politics above the characters and story of the show/game. Dispatch does not do this, whereas Starfleet Academy, it is all they do, to the point that the only identifying character of Jaden, beyond his sexuality, is the fucking makeup he wears. Now, this is, of course, a very clear example, chosen to illustrate the obvious differences in question. Fortunately for us, it normally is this clear of an example, as by definition, woke tends to be pretty obvious. As viewing the world through an intersectional lens, as we've already talked about, well, it tends to be a very alien way to view the world, thus very grating and obvious to detect. But having answered the original question of why does the right wing like Dispatch, and also having answered what is woke, let's throw in a bonus question as well. What do we do when it's not actually obvious? See, it's all very easy to dunk on Starfleet Academy or the Acolyte. These are near universally reviled and rejected pieces of media. It is not always so easy, however, and to continue our quest to not just replicate the left's Nazi, and to also not cede ground to the left unnecessarily, we have to look at some more edge cases. The two recent incidents that stand out the most to me are Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and X-Men 97. Both of these titles became interesting battlegrounds in the culture wars and to some extent little civil wars on the right. Let us start with the most controversial of the two, KCD 2. This was a game that all of us were very excited for. Kingdom Come Deliverance 1 was not just a good game, but a very non-woke game as well, refusing to put random women, warriors, and black people into ancient Bohemia, simply because they, well, weren't there in ancient Bohemia. But in KCD 2, a few things changed. Firstly, there are a fair few rather assertive women in the game. Secondly, there is a black man in there now, a Muslim scholar named Musa of Mali, who spends his time taking shots at Christianity and the West, and better still, cannot be killed as he is mission critical to the campaign. Already this is feeling like a strange reversal from the first game, and many fans were beginning to feel betrayed. But the worst had yet to come, as the game also introduced a gay romance between the two best friends, Henry and Hans. This felt tremendously forced, as the two were best buddies, and at no point ever even hinted at any sort of romantic attachment. It's very understandably felt like a nod to the LGBTQ crowd for purely political reasons, thus to make them gay. It also reinforced the feelings of betrayal. Why are these devs who were our guys doing this to us? It got a lot of people very, very angry and got them to be vehemently against the game. I can see it from both sides. This does indeed very much so feel like a forced woke move, even if I can also argue that the gay romance is very hard to get and requires you to really seek it out. However, it still just feels gross and inappropriate. Yet, I went out of my way to defend KCD2 and argued that its woke elements should not prevent us from laying claim to a game that was, and still is, overwhelmingly Christian and conservative. Which raises the question, when do we embrace a game and when do we reject it? Is there a clear dividing line? Yes and no. On the one hand, the majority of the time, it is pretty obvious to see when an entity is woke or not. But in the case of doubt, how much woke is too much? Some would argue that any percent is too much. This was the progressive view of things. Everything was problematic and everything had to be pointed out. An absolute worldview that did not serve them very well at all in the end. As the reality is, we kind of have to be reasonable with this and make a decision partially motivated by strategy. KCD2 was a good game and a hugely successful one to boot. We gain nothing from rejecting it. We, in fact, look a little bit crazy, and we gain plenty from accepting it. 90% of the game is our worldview, and if the normies can enjoy that and not feel preached at, it is all the better. Perfect is, as ever, the enemy of good enough, and this was more than good enough. We just have to take the W when it's granted to us. X-Men 97, on the other hand, is a bit more complicated, and a simpler example at the same time as well. Whereas KCD2 was eagerly awaited by our side, X-Men 97 was largely rejected before it even came out. I mean, come on! A reboot of the classic animated X-Men show, now in 2024, produced for modern-day Marvel by Disney. Oh, and by the way, written by a massive homosexual that spends his days doing gay OnlyFans. It has to bomb. There is no way this will not be a woke mess of apocalyptic proportions. In fact, most of the right-wing commentator sphere simply chose to ignore the show entirely. Many of them are still ignoring it to this day as if it never happened, simply assuming it would be total unrepentant garbage. It wasn't. Absurdly, it felt precisely like the old show. If anything, that was actually 97's biggest weakness, as it picked up plot points more than 20 years old, confusing the shit out of people and new viewers. The animations were solid, if a little bit primitive. The voice acting was good, even if the age of some of them are starting to show. And the story was excellent, with one scene in particular that legit gave me goosebumps. It is hands down the best X-Men we have gotten since Evolution back in 2000. And yes, admittedly, there was some weird stuff in there too, like Magneto in a Speedo. And most controversial of all, the announcement that Morph would now be a non-binary character. Oh, and he has a crush on Wolverine. Listen, I can quite happily defend this, okay? Yes, Morph was, to use the left-wing term, male-presenting in the old show. But he is also a literal shape-shifting mutant who probably does have a crush on Logan, as he's pretty much the only one of the X-Men who tried to get Morph back into the team after he was manipulated into betraying the X-Men in the old show. He would probably have a rather strong connection to Logan. Simultaneously, though, whilst the show did all right, it didn't do spectacularly. And with Bo DeMeo, the original writer, now kicked off the team for being, quote, horrible to work with. I mean, having seen what he does on the internet, I can maybe see why. But then at the same time, I also remember that Henry Cavill was kicked off The Witcher for being horrible to work with. So maybe he was removed for being a little bit too enthusiastic as well. Anyways, there are now very long odds that the show will maintain that quality. Because again, you can say what you will about Beau DeMayo, he's a weird one. But he has clearly demonstrated he understands the X-Men a lot better than most, and anyone else who's been writing it for the last 25 years. Especially in the current age of the X-Men were a commentary on civil rights, which they were not, by the way. If anything, I'd sooner accept it as a commentary on the First Amendment than anything, but I'm getting off track. The danger with shows like 97 and games like KCD2 is that we might fall for the intersectional lens ourselves. We might look at Henry and see that one intersectional point where he has a gay romance and use that to reduce him to just that. Which is particularly silly in this case, as getting to that gay romance, it is hidden behind half a dozen very specific dialogue choices. It is something that you will probably never come across unless you specifically seek it out. We must be careful that we do not miss the tree for the forest, that we do not reduce a much larger thing into a sliver. It is the same with the X-Men. It absolutely has an element or two here and there that raises a blip on the woke dar, yet we must again be careful to not get too obsessed with noticing. It is at once our greatest tool, because there sure as shit has been a lot to notice over the last few years. Conversely, something like a strong female character is a thing we once celebrated. See Ripley or Xena, Warrior Princess, for examples. There was even a time in the long, foggy, forgotten days of the Stone Age where lesbians were considered hot, rather than a sign of Marxist political subversion. We should view, therefore, the definition of woke and its consequences of reducing things to their component parts rather than as a whole, as a warning sign, as something negative that we are loath to replicate. Not just because it is reductive and fucking ridiculous, but because we also have now the benefit of hindsight here. The intersectional lens, along with the generally combative nature of the left, was not successful. It did not change culture. And now that we know what woke means, what defines woke entertainment, we are perfectly prepared to do better. Both to identify the woke when required, and take the necessary steps to sink it, whilst also being able to embrace the things that will eventually evolve into, God's willing, another golden age of entertainment. Finally, if you agree, disagree, or simply want to weigh in with your own take on what woke truly means, and whether or not we should tolerate a certain degree of wokeness, whether it even is woke at that point at all, or whether or not we should go full scorched earth, well, please do go ahead and let me know in the comment section down below. And until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.